We come today to the second part of the parable of the Father's love, taken from Luke 15. And last week I talked about the parable as it was seen by the Dutch priest and Christian writer Henry Nouwen through his eyes and the lens of Rembrandt's painting, The Return of the Prodigal Son. And Henry Nouwen wrote that this is the story of not one but of two lost sons. Not only did the younger son who left home look to freedom and happiness in a distant country get lost while he was doing it, also the one who stayed home became a lost man. So I'm not going to read the whole of Luke 15 again of the parable, but I'm going to read just the last portion about the elder son, verses 25 through 32. The younger son had gone and returned from poverty, and the father had thrown a feast for him. And now the father goes out of the house to find the older son because he hasn't come in to join in the celebration. So Jesus said, "Meanwhile, the other son was in the field. When he came near to the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even so much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found.'" Though Jesus told the younger son's story of flight and return with drama and pathos, Nouwen wrote that it was clear that the hardest conversion to go through is the conversion of the son who stayed home. The lostness of the elder son is much harder to identify. After all, he did all the right things. He was obedient, dutiful, law-abiding, and hard-working. People respected him. They admired him. They praised him, and they likely considered him to be the model son. Outwardly, this elder son was faultless. But when confronted by his father's joy at the return of his younger brother, a dark power erupts in him and boils to the surface. And suddenly there becomes glaringly visible a resentful, proud, and unkind, selfish person, one that remained deeply hidden, even though he had been growing stronger and more powerful in his resentment over the years. So Henry Nouwen looked deeply at both Jesus' words about the older son and Rembrandt's painting of the same. And he wrote, "When I listen carefully to the words which the elder son attacks the father with, the self-righteous, self-pitying, jealous words, I hear a deeper complaint. It is the complaint that comes from a heart that feels it never received what it was due. It is the complaint that cries out, 'I've tried so hard, worked so long, did so much, and still I have not received what others get so easily.' From his perspective of resentment and bitterness, the elder son was unable not only to share in his father's joy at the brother's return, but he was moved to anger when he saw that joy. The elder son was lost in a wilderness even more remote than that distant land where his brother had wandered. He was lost in resentment, ensnared by his jealousy, and imprisoned by obedience so that he was enslaved to duty. He had become a foreigner in his own house." Well, Henry Nouwen reflected on his own life as a priest, and he said that he understood that there's an interior and exterior dimension to our personalities and to the elder son's personality. He knew intimately the one who was on the outside, who was seen to do all the right things. But on the inside, he seethed with resentment. Nouwen wrote, "The more I think about the elder son, the more I recognize myself in him. As the eldest son in my own family, I know well what it feels like to have to be the model son. Elder sons want to live up to the expectations of their parents. They want to please, and they often fear being a disappointment. They often also experience, quite early in life, a certain envy toward the younger siblings, who seem to be less concerned about pleasing and much freer to do their own thing. I did all the proper things, mostly complying with the agendas set by the many parental figures in my life, my teachers, spiritual directors, bishops, and popes. But at the same time, I wondered why I didn't have the courage to run away like the younger son did. The obedient and dutiful life of which I am proud, or for which I am praised, feels sometimes like a burden that was laid on me, on my shoulders, by others, and continues to oppress me, even when I've accepted to such a degree this stricture that I cannot throw off. I have no trouble identifying with the elder son who complained, all these years I've slaved for you and never disobeyed you, and you never offered me so much as a young kid to celebrate with my own friends. In this complaint, obedience and duty have become a burden, and service has become slavery." Henry Nouwen thought about his own personality, and he thought that when he looked deeply, he saw himself as a complainer. And complaining is a double-edged sword. He observed from his own life that complaining is self-perpetuating and counterproductive. Whenever I express my complaints in the hope of evoking pity and receiving the satisfaction I so much desire, the result is always the opposite of what I'm trying to get. Often I catch myself complaining about the little rejections, the little impolitenesses, the little negligences. And time and again I discover within me that murmuring, whining, grumbling, lamenting, and griping that goes on even against my own will. A complainer is hard to live with. The tragedy is often the complaint, once it's expressed, leads to what is most feared in the first place, and that is further rejection. I think we all know that. If we don't know it in ourselves, we probably should, and we can readily identify it in others, those who habitually complain. Henry Nouwen commented that his identity with the elder son is not unique. There are many elder sons, he wrote, and elder daughters who are lost while they're still at home. And it is in this lostness that's characterized by the condemnation and anger and resentment, the bitterness and jealousy, that is so pernicious and damaging to the human heart. I think that this lostness can be felt by many people who are not necessarily elders by birth. It can affect anyone who takes duty and obedience to unhealthy extremes by building a wall around his or her heart. And we should know that well as Christians. When serving becomes slavery, we have entered that place. While Jesus' story doesn't tell us what happened to the elder son, we are left to wonder. Henry Nouwen wrote that for him, personally, the possible conversion of the elder son is what is of crucial importance in this part of the parable. Can the elder son be found as the younger son was found? It was actually easier for the younger son to find himself. But how could the elder son return? Henry Nouwen knew from personal experience that the elder son couldn't heal himself. He could only be healed from above. He could only be healed by his father. And now we look at the father in the parable. We see that the story really is not about the prodigal son or the elder son. It is about the father's love for each of them. Because the father wants not only his younger son back, but he wants his elder son as well. Henry Nouwen said, this is not a story that separates two brothers into the good son and the evil son. The father isn't comparing the two sons. Did you ever see that in this parable? The father doesn't say to the younger son, why can't you be like your older brother and stay and do what you're supposed to do? And he doesn't say to the older brother, why can't you be like your younger brother, repentant and soft of heart? The father doesn't compare them, but he loves both of them with a complete love, and he expresses that love according to their individual journeys. He knows both his sons intimately. He understands that they have highly unique gifts and shortcomings. He sees with love the passion of the younger son. Certainly he was a passionate boy, but it was not regulated by obedience. And with the same love, he sees this obedience of the elder son, but it is not vitalized by any passion. Only the father is good. He loves both sons, and he runs out to meet both sons. He wants both to come to the table and participate in the joy. And yet the father's love does not force itself on either of the sons. Stop and consider what kind of a father is capable of this kind of love. A love which is open-ended, never coerced. And we realize that there is no earthly father who could love us so perfectly. Because the Father whom Jesus was writing about, of course, was his own Father in heaven. Rembrandt, too, seemed to know this love well. And Henry Nouwen wrote of the concept that Rembrandt painted in the painting of the Father. Looking at the way in which Rembrandt portrays the Father, he wrote, there came to me a whole new interior understanding of tenderness and mercy and forgiveness. Seldom, if ever, has God's immense, compassionate love been expressed in such a poignant way. Every detail of the Father's figure, his facial expression, his posture, the colors of the dress, and most of all, the still gesture of his hands, speaks of his divine love for humanity that existed from the beginning of the world and will ever be. Now, last week we did have a representation of the whole picture. This week we only have this picture of the hands, and it's not the greatest, but it can show you what I want you to see. Look at those hands closely. Henry Nouwen claimed that the true center of this painting is the hands of the Father. On them all the light is concentrated. On them the eyes of all the bystanders are focused. In them mercy becomes enfleshed. Upon them forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing come together. And through them, not only the tired son, but also the worn-out father find their rest. Over the years, I've come to know those hands. Those are God's hands. They are also the hands of my parents, my teachers, friends, healers, and all those whom God has given me to remind me of how safely I am held. There's something particular and deliberate about the way these hands are painted. They're quite different. Look at the left hand that's touching the son's shoulder. It's strong and muscular. You can see the strength that's evident in the grasping posture and the pressure being exerted by the thumb. Now look at the right hand. It doesn't hold or grasp. It's refined and soft and tender. The fingers are close to each other and have an elegant quality. It lies gently upon the son's shoulder. It's not like a man's hand. It's like a woman's hand. The hands of God that Rembrandt painted opened a new world of meaning for Nouwen. He saw that God is both the Father and the Mother. The Father holds and the Mother caresses. The Father confirms and the Mother consoles. In God, both manhood and womanhood, fatherhood and motherhood are present fully. And Henry Nouwen saw in the gentle caressing right hand in the painting the echoes of what the prophet Isaiah wrote. Can a woman forget her own baby at her breast? Feel no pity for the child she has borne? Even if these were to forget you, I will never forget you. Look, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. For Henry Nouwen, this parable of the prodigal son speaks of the love that is the first and everlasting love of a God who is the Father as well as the Mother, a love which is the fountain of all true human love, even the most limited of that love. Jesus' whole life in preaching had only one aim, and that was to reveal this inexhaustible, unlimited motherly and fatherly love of God the Father, to show the way to let that love guide every part of our lives. And so what's the ultimate message of the parable? As we see, there are many layers of meaning here. Henry Nouwen saw it this way. When the prodigal son returns home, he returns not to remain a child, but to claim his sonship and to become a father himself. The invitation to every returned prodigal and to every lost elder son or daughter is to become like the Father, one who loves impartially, without coercion, always with open arms. And how can this be done, we might ask? Henry Nouwen answers that to become like the Father, we must do as the Father has done. We must travel the way the Father has journeyed, through grief, forgiveness, and generosity. Grief is a prayer. Did you ever think of it that way? But grief is a prayer that expresses a compassionate heart. Like the Father's grief, our prayers must be a discipline of our hearts that sees the sin of the world and yet knows itself to be sorrowful for the price of freedom without love, which cannot bloom. Sin is that price. This prayer prepares our hearts toward hope and cultivates a love which can receive anyone, whatever the journey has been, and to forgive them from our hearts. The second way to go to spiritual fatherhood is forgiveness. Henry Nouwen acknowledged that forgiveness from the heart is very, very difficult. We all know that. We know how hard it is to truly forgive, to forget and forgive. It's next to impossible. But God's forgiveness is unconditional. It comes from a heart that does not demand anything for itself, a heart that is completely empty of self-seeking. This kind of forgiveness can only become part of our spiritual character if we practice it daily in our lives. Nouwen struggled with forgiveness. He wrote, "It challenges me to step over all my needs for gratitude and compliments. It demands of me that I step over that wounded part of my heart that feels hurt and wronged and wants to stay in control and put a few conditions between me and the one whom I'm asked to forgive." Sound familiar? Often I have to climb over a wall of arguments that I've built up and angry feelings that I've erected between myself and all those whom I love, but so often do not return love in the way that I want it. It's a wall of fear of being hurt again. It's a wall of pride and the desire to stay in control. But every time I step or I climb over that wall, I enter the house where the Father dwells. And there I can touch my neighbor with true and genuine compassionate love. Finally, the last way to become like the Father is through generosity of heart. In the parable, the Father not only gives the departing son everything he asks for without condition, but he also showers gifts upon him on his return. He doesn't accept him back as a slave, he accepts him as a son with everything that means. And to the elder son, he says, "All I have is yours, it always has been. There's nothing that I keep for myself." He gives everything away without reserve. No strings attached. I'd love to be a parent like that, wouldn't you? In order to become like the Father, Henry Nouwen said that we must be as generous as him. And just as the Father gives his very self to his children, so I must give my very self to my brothers and sisters. That's the call for us Christians. But we all know this doesn't come spontaneously. The gift of self-discipline, giving of self is a discipline because it's our nature to only look to our own desires first. And yet this is exactly what the Father did in the parable. This is what Jesus did. He gave himself without reserve for others. He gave himself for you and for me. And it is because of what Jesus did and his gift to us on the cross that we can become like the Father. Isn't that amazing? We become brothers and sisters through the adoption into the family of God. Our adoption papers were signed with the blood of the cross. Like a mother, Jesus gives us new birth into this new family through baptism and rebirth. And like a father, Jesus never leaves us. He's promised never to leave or forsake us, though we may choose to leave him. His arms are always open to receive us back home. The posture on the cross, his arms are open. And through his abiding presence with us in the Holy Spirit, Jesus continues to encourage all of us to become like the Father, the one who grieves the loss of love, the one who forgives without reservation, the one who gives without restriction. Let us pray. Father, you have loved us with an everlasting love, a love which calls us forth out of the darkness and into your marvelous light. With great compassion, you wait for us with your arms open, gathering us from the distant places where we have abandoned you. With tears, you have grieved for us. In forgiveness, you have offered us hope. And in your grace, you have given us new life. You've called us your children, and you patiently encourage us toward adulthood, never coercing us, never forcing your love upon us, but always in the hope that we will one day become like you, compassionate, forgiving, and generous with love. Stir in us now these gifts as we bring before you in our prayers the griefs of our own hearts, the prayers that we carry as burdens for others. We thank you for your Son, Jesus, that your gifts to us are possible through his gift for us on the cross. We thank you, Lord, for the men and women serving in the military and in all of those functions that keep us free and at peace across the world. We ask that you would do all in your will to move the world to peace, the kind of peace that you bring by your presence.
Little more than a decade ago, thousands of Christians called Mosul, Iraq, home. That is no longer the case. ISIS militants took over the city and essentially wiped out the Christian population. It's something that they're continuing, that brutal behavior all across the region. Author of the new book, Defying ISIS, Johnny Moore, has visited that area many times. Joins us now for a first-hand account. Johnny, always good to have you with us.
Thanks, Shannon. Good to be with you.
And sometimes, I mean, you have been hammering on this subject for a long time. You've seen it firsthand, and it seems like a lot of people are just now waking up to something that appears to be a genocide. You have talked with the leaders there who are watching their churches burn down, their parishioners kidnapped, raped, killed, sold into slavery. Why do you think it's taking so long for this message to get through to the West?
Well, I think it's two things. I think, first of all, people just didn't know it was happening because they couldn't believe it was true. I mean, these stories are just horrific beyond belief. I mean, children being killed for their faith, women being sold by the thousands on slave markets, churches that have had continual worship for 1,600 years being destroyed. I mean, it just was just incomprehensible to people. And I mean, you and I sitting on this very program a year and a half ago talking about what was coming, and it came. And here we are in the holiest week in Christianity for 2 billion Christians around the world, and we're witnessing a once-in-a-thousand-year crisis that has seen the total elimination from some of the most ancient Christian populations in the Middle East, Christian populations who got the gospel first from the apostles themselves. And it's time Well, actually, there is no time left. We've got to rush, we've got to do it quickly, we've got to rescue these people and stop it from continuing.
Yeah, and there are millions of refugees who are flooding now into surrounding countries. That's an enormous taxing on their resources, their governments. I know a lot of aid organizations are moving in and trying their best, but it is, the numbers can be overwhelming. And ISIS obviously has been very specific in targeting specific populations, but also the churches, the artwork, the sacred texts. They very much want to wipe out any religion that doesn't agree with their own.
Yeah, the world watched in horror as ISIS destroyed the ruins of these ancient cities, as they broke down the crosses on ancient churches. Even in the last week, they've done it again. They destroyed a 4th century monastery just outside of Mosul. And by the way, no one really paid attention to it. But after they destroyed the monastery, then they destroyed the remaining Christian houses in town. And there weren't any Christians left, and there weren't any people worshiping in that church anymore. In fact, there aren't any Christians left in that whole part of the Nineveh plain. So they don't have anyone left to kill. They don't have anyone left to imprison. And so now they're destroying their history, and that is why it's genocide. And by the way, there are a few fledgling populations that we still can rescue. They're the displaced ones that are living in refugee camps in deplorable conditions without the aid that they need. And then there's still those that are under ISIS's influence and control. But see, the United States and other Western powers and other countries with influence aren't doing enough. Just about 14 days ago, ISIS kidnapped 300 Christians along the Cabo River. They did it in a convoy of 40 clearly marked ISIS vehicles going to 10 unarmed Christian villages. And yet there wasn't a single airstrike. There wasn't a single attempt to push them back. And by the way, the Christians that were kidnapped there, the 300, we haven't a clue what has happened to them. All we know is that they've been paying the ISIS tax for the last year. But finally ISIS said, okay, we're done with that, so now we're going to take you and we're going to imprison you, and only God knows what will happen to them. So the question I'm asking all over planet Earth, just over and over and over again, is how many Christians are going to be imprisoned? How many children are going to be killed? How many women are going to be enslaved and raped? When is this going to end? Because we're not taking it seriously enough. We're only doing 7 to 12 airstrikes a day in Iraq and Syria. During the Bosnian conflict, it was like 140 a day. We're not taking it seriously enough.
Yeah, and while there is a great focus on the Christians who are being specifically targeted, and as you mentioned, essentially for genocide, we know other religious minorities, the Yazidis and others of the Islamic faith who don't necessarily agree with what Islam is promoting and what they adhere to. All of them are in danger. Johnny, thank you for the awareness you're bringing to this. You're doing a lot of important writing, too. Thanks for being with us.
I am tired and so weary, but I must travel on till the Lord comes to call me away, where the morning is bright and the Lamb is the light, and the night is as fair as the day. There will be peace in the valley for me someday. There will be peace in the valley for me. Oh Lord, I pray there'll be no sorrow and sadness, no trouble I'll see. There'll be peace in the valley for me, for me. Well, the bear will be gentle and the wolf will be tame, and the lion will lay down by the lamb. Well, the host from the wild will be led by a child. I'll be changed from the creature that I am. There will be peace in the valley for me.